damaged, it exudes this resin. So what we do is that we extract it. So resin extraction was a traditional activity in the Portuguese forestry sector. So in the 1970s, Portugal was the third producer of resin worldwide. However, as you can see in this graphic here, this is the production in tons of resin per year, and this is the price of the resin. So the resin prices were very low, which made us abandon this activity. However, the prices now are higher, so we are expecting that we will come back to this activity and recuperate and start again to extract this resin, because we still have the pine trees. So it's just a question of promoting this activity and make people come back. So what you see here is a bag collecting the resin, and here are these wounds that are made in the tree. Every 2 to 3 weeks, you make this little wound in the tree with a specialized tool, and you apply this chemical solution that makes the tree exude more resin than it normally uses. This is not a lethal activity to the tree, so the cambium is not affected. We are not killing the tree. So we can do this for, I think, that 5 years consecutively. But again, this is regulated, and are 2 types of resin extraction. To the depth, it's when the tree is going to be felled, and you can do it more intensively, and at life, it's when you do it less intensively and for longer periods of time. So this resin sector, when we collect the resin, the natural resin, this resin is distilled, and it gives 2 subproducts. So the first subproduct is turpentine, which is used, it only represents 20%. It is used mostly in the perfume industry to produce, I can't read it, perfumes, disinfectants, pharmaceutical industry, insecticides, all of that. And then the second part, which it's 80% of natural resin, it's the gum resin, gum rosin. And this has several different applications that as you can see here, and there are a lot of materials and products that we have no idea that have natural resin in them and have this gum rosin. So we have adhesives, rubber, paint, depilatory waxes, carpets, chewing gum, all of these have gum rosin in it. So if we can, and if we invest in this industry, it has the potential to replace materials of fossil origin, improving sustainability. So right now, oh, okay, but I still had this slide. So this one is about the resin sector in Portugal and what it represents. It represents 179,000 million euros. 89%, 86% of the production of this sector is to export. And right now, Portugal is only producing 5,600 tons of resin, and we need to import 27,000 tons of resin for our industry to operate. So one thing that we need to do is to promote this resin extraction to try to be more sustainable and produce enough resin for our factories. So right now we have a project that was approved in the PRR, the Plan for the Portuguese Recuperation and Recovery, in the bioeconomy component of it. So this plan, they identified 3 sectors to promote the bioeconomy transition to bio-based products and increase the efficiency in the use of resources, creating value. And these sectors are the textile sector, the shoe sector, and the natural resin sector. So there is already this necessity has already been identified, and this sector is going now to have this project RN21, which Polytechnic Leiria is one of the partners of the project, and we are starting next month, ideally. So the aim of this project is to not only promote the activity of resin extraction with forestry measures designed to potentiate resin production, but it also has a strong industry component to optimize and capacitate the first and second transformation industry. So besides cork and resin, there are other forest products, such as these mushrooms, the honey, chestnuts, pine nuts, medronho. So all of these products can improve the sustainability of our economy by creating jobs and revenues in rural areas and by presenting alternatives to materials of fossil energy. So besides these products that the forest has, we also have forest services, which are the economic system, the ecosystem services. And these ecosystem services are defined as the contributions that ecosystems make to human well-being. So we have these 4 types of ecosystem services, which are the provisioning services, the regulation services, cultural services, and supporting services. So the provisioning services are the food, fiber, fuel, biomass, the medicinal plants, pharmaceuticals, fresh water, and clean air, all provided through the forests, all provided through these ecosystems, natural ecosystems. Then we have these regulation ecosystem services that are related to the regulation of temperature, because forests provide this shade and these microhabitats where the temperature is lower. They also have this air and water quality, because the soil, the forest soils, act as a filtration system for the water, so it also helps maintain water quality. It has this pest regulation on its own, and it's also very important for this carbon sequestration and storage. I will come to that further. So there's also this component of this cultural aspect of the ecosystems that is related to the recreation and tourism, to the aesthetic values, the ethical values, education. So it's also a space for us to enjoy, and that is also an ecosystem service. And finally, this supporting ecosystem services, that it's the nutrient recycling, because we have this important part, which is the decomposition of materials and the upcycling of these materials. So it's an important ecosystem service provided by forests, the nutrient cycling, also the primary production with trees, and also with these herbs, photosynthesis, the hydrological cycle, and of course, habitat provision, because biodiversity, it's in itself also an ecosystem service. So we have talked about the forest services, but there are also several challenges that the forest sector is facing, and that we need also to address it. So we have this problem related to the manual labor, because it's very difficult to find workers, and because most of the exploitation of these resources is mostly done manually with high production and extraction costs. As you can see here, the extraction of cork is a manual labor. The renewal of those resin wounds is a manual labor. The collection of these fruits, it's all manual labor. So it's really difficult to find these workers. So although we have an additional employment source in these rural areas, it's also very difficult to find workers, because people tend to get away from these jobs related to forestry and agriculture. So there's this problem, the lack of workers. There's also the need for technical innovation through mechanical exploitation and more efficient logistics for the product to reach the consumer at a fair price and with a warranty of return for all intervenients in the value chain. And there's also the need to create consumer awareness for these products that are proximity products, that are local products with high quality and high value. And there's also a need to create a market to identify these products as local, as biological, as natural, as renewable products, and products of our forests. So there's also the need to improve the R&D for productivity and resistance to pests, and also to develop new products derived from these non-wood forestry products. So we already have several products, but it's possible to create others and also to explore new markets. Another challenge is because these are challenges that are easier to face than others. So another challenge and a big one for forests and forestry sector and for all other sectors, because this is a transversal problem, is climate change. So we know that if you see by this map here, which is representing the climate change in the last 50 years, you see that the area where Portugal is in the Mediterranean has already increased 2 degrees in the last 50 years as compared to this period from 556 to 76. So, and why is this a problem? Climate change, this rise in temperature doesn't mean that the temperature is just 2 degrees warmer year round. No, what this means is that we have these extreme climatic events, and these are the real problem because they present this enormous impact on trees and forests because of they have, well, not just the drought in itself that can create these events of tree dieback, but also the trees, because they are under this hydrological stress, they are more vulnerable to pests and they can also die from that. So it is a really big problem that we need to address, and we need to be more aware of it and try to adapt ourselves to these changes and try to be more sustainable in our choices. So another problem of the Portuguese forestry sector is that 98% of our forest is privately owned, where the European average is 39.7. So this is a really big difference. And what's the problem with this? Is that these small land owners, they are not capable or they're not interested because they're not there anymore of having a proper and sustainable forest management. So the good thing is that although 98% of the Portuguese forest is private, 30% of those forests are certified areas, which is an indicator of an active forest management. But we see that with the sustainable forest management combined with silvicultural best practices adapted to climate change can help to reconcile the production and the conservation functions, reducing biotic and abiotic risks and maintaining or even increasing the productivity of our forests. So forests can also help achieve this carbon neutrality. So we have these targets that were set by Portugal to reduce by 2015, be carbon neutral by 2015, compared to what were the emissions in 2005. And forests can help. However, we need also to help them because right now the forests are only retaining 8.5 million tons and we are emitting 86 to 90 million tons. So there's a big difference here where we are only capturing and retaining in the forests 12% of the carbon we are emitting. This is the average of Portugal. The European average is of 20%. So we need to have more sustainable forests. We need to improve our silvicultural practices in order to have more productive forests. And also, if the forests are taken care of, they will be less prone to fires and to that other problem. So the take-home message: investments are needed to reinforce non-wood value chains through mechanical exploitation and more efficient logistics, which will lead to the increase of national production and market share. Sustainable forest management needs to be promoted to obtain a resilient, biodiverse, and productive forests. Forest products are a natural and renewable alternative to materials for fossil energy that will help reduce the dependence on non-renewable sources. We need a sustainable and circular bioeconomy based on natural and renewable resources to mitigate climate change and promote local economies. So we need to move from a fossil-based economy to a bio-based economy. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Joanna, for your inspiring presentation. There are any questions? Can stay here.
Yes.
Okay.
A comment, which is in your take-home message, you seem to put a great deal of emphasis on non-wood products, whereas in fact the wood-based products actually by the largest volume. And you don't, you're expecting all of the developments in construction, in house building, in all of these things and to do with the processing of the pine resin to come from the existing industries. Is that correct?
Well, the industries are already there and they are already operating. So we already have this know-how to get to produce the products. We need research to produce new products because we already have some products, but we want to diverse the amount of products we already have. And I focused more on these non-wood forest materials because wood materials already have a lot of attention and everyone already knows wood and it's already, there's already a lot of investment in that area. Whereas in the non-wood forest products, it's something that we are already now creating more awareness and driving more attention to it. That's why I talked more about non-wood forest products than the forest products.
The PRR project that you mentioned, it's most focused on RESIM or RESIM.
Resin.
Okay.
Well, there's both things.
Yes,
There's
yes.
resin and there's gum rosin, which is a part of the resin. No, but it's focused on both. So we have two pillars. So we have one pillar that is more focused on forest and in developing new ways to extract the resin. So new collecting mechanisms. It has some research in the genetics of the trees to define which are more productive and less productive and try to determine why and produce those trees more productive. So it's in the long term, because if we are now identifying cloning the more productive trees, it will take them 30 years to start producing resin. So this is in the long term. And the other part of the project, the other pillar, is more industry oriented. So it's in an investment to develop new products derived from these gum rosins, new products and new industrial process to achieve other products. So it has both. Yes, it's bioeconomy, it's greener. Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Thank you.
But from what I understood from your presentation, we all have work to do. It's more, if 98% of the forests are private, well, we have to be more conscious that we all have our job and to take care what is ours, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And do you promote any kind of actions to address the owners of the forests, the small ones?
We have these actions planned in the future, these sensibility actions, this, I don't know, these outreach activities. Yes, we do have those plans.
Okay.
We do that.
Thank
you.
You're welcome.
This is not really a question, but it's really nice that you talked about the 12% that's trapped, the CO2 that's trapped in forests, because the CO2 it's trapped on soils and forests the most, and it's really important to be more environmentally friendly, and talking about it, it's very good.
Thank you. It's an important ecosystem service. So the function of trees and forests to capture the carbon dioxide. And yes, as you said, it's not just a tree, it's all in the soil, it's all the surrounding. So that's important too. Thank you.
There are no online questions, no? Okay, thank you very much again, Joanna, for your presentation. Next, we will welcome Maria Manuel Gil, from Marine and Environmental Sciences Center, also from Polytechnic of Leiria, with a presentation which is related with oceans and sustainability. I don't know, I think it's art. Okay, so good presentation.
Sorry, can I share the screen? No,
Yes.
I'm not just. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Can I start?
Yeah, of course.
So, good afternoon to all, and thanks to Professor Geoffrey for the invitation to be here and to talk about marine resources and how can we combine marine resources with additive manufacturing technology, and more specific to talk about the 3D footprinting and the use of marine resources as a food to be used to develop new 3D textures. First of all, just let me introduce where I came from and talk a little bit about MARE. So MARE is a Marine and Environmental Research Center, and we are organized in 7 different poles. We have more than 500 researchers, almost 300 are PhD researchers, and we have a pole at University of Coimbra, another one at University of Lisbon, another at University of ISPA, and the New Lisbon, another one in Madeira, another one at University of Évora, and then another one at the Polytechnic of Leiria, which is located here in Peniche, in Sete Mares, which is an infrastructure dedicated to marine science and technology. And we are inside the port of Peniche, which for us it's a privileged location that allows us to integrate and to work together with the stakeholders and with the marine industries. So just let me show a short video of not working. Of Sete Mares. So just to show you who we are and our capacity building, and to explain that we are very focused in the study of marine resources, while we are combining those marine resources with the new technology or innovative technology, which is the 3D footprinting. We are very focused in needed-based research, and we are mainly working with blue biotechnology, marine food resources and innovation, and aquaculture, sustainability, and marine biology. And this vocation is reflected in more than 100 collaboration with the industry, from the food technology to aquaculture, to the feed industry, and so on. And today my presentation will focus on the potential of marine food resources to design foods by 3D printing, and why we should be working on solutions to a most sustainable world. This idea actually starts with Professor Joffrey. Why not combining the area of food technology and marine resources with the additive manufacturing, the 3D printing? So with this regard, 3 topics must be considered. We need to do some innovation, and we need to have a more consumption and responsible production, also focus on a zero waste based. But we also have to be more sustainable in our consumption and more focused on use non-traditional foods, such as seaweeds and exploited fish, and also byproducts. But we need to take care also about the availability and the utilization of those food resources. So we need to create more nutritional food, but also be in mind question related to food safety and quality, and also take care and use of the innovative and emergent technology that can prevent the sustainability of the food resources. So we need to innovate. We need that the food availability needs to increase. Population is growing. We need lots of foods, but with a lot of nutritional issues, because there's a lot of hunger but also undernutrition. However, we had limited biological resources and ecosystems essential for food. A lot of the food produced for human consumption is wasted. There's a huge discrepancy between increased demand for high quality food and sustainable aspects. And we have aging population and a lot of population with dietary restrictions. So we need new processes and also customized food to give answers and to produce the food that we need in the next years. And so we need to look globally, and we need to develop an integrated strategy to give the entire value chain value, to increase the value of the entire value chain. But we also need to have some innovation in the products, but also in the processes. We need to look more for the environment. We also need to increase the food that we eat. We need to include non-traditional foods, such as algae, but also insects and byproducts. And we need to look and develop new technology solutions, but we also need to increase the consumption of abundant but little consumed species. So with this in mind, we think, why not combine seaweeds, seafood, and other byproducts with additive manufacturing to design marine-based foods by 3D printing that can help to increase the sustainable production of foods. But why marine resources? The growing need for nutrition and healthy food will increase the demand for fishery products from marine sources, whose productivity is already highly stressed, as you know, by the excessive fishing pressure, but also growing organic pollution, toxic contamination, coastal degradation, and climate change. However, we need to change the way we consume the fish. So we need to increase the number of the species, but also have a look to other marine species, such as the seaweeds that can also be a source of nutrients. And why seaweeds? There's a lot of seaweeds and there's a lot of marine biodiversity. The human consumption is too low, and then can be produced in an aquaculture system. And they are rich in several nutrients, so they can be a good source of food. They belong to the 3 different groups. We have the brown algae, the green, and the red. They are normally used in pharmaceutics, nutraceutics, cosmetic feed, and so on. And they have different nutrients, depend on the group that they belong, but they are normally rich in minerals, vitamins, and also other bioactive compounds. There's an example of one of these, this group. We can have Gracilaria, Porphyria, Fuchs. They are all edible with high commercial value, and they are easy to produce in an aquaculture system, so we can guarantee the sustainability. They have a lot of bioactive molecules, and they also have polysaccharides. And so we can use seaweeds, but also microalgae that can also be sustainably produced, and look for the traditional foods and develop functional foods, new functional foods with new ingredients, with valuable compounds to promote health. However, those microalgae and seaweeds, those micro and macroalgae, presents a lot of disadvantages. They are not easy to eat because they have some off flavors, and they have also an early loss of compound functionality. So, and the introduction into the consumer's diet is more complicated than we thought. And so we have a lot of key challenge, how to introduce this, but we need to develop also some food tailored to the nutritional individual needs, and also a specific portion that we need to feed the population in a base of zero waste scope. So, on the other hand, we have more than 2,000 harvested fish species, but 30 species alone represent more than 50% of the total of the capture. So we also need to increase the consumption of the unexploited fish, but also the byproducts that are rich in several nutrients, and namely vitamins and minerals. So we need to look in a different way. How can we introduce some species that people normally don't eat because they are not very familiar, they don't like the look, the appearance, they don't like the color, and so on. So we have to change our mind. We have to think, how can we introduce, how can we develop different foods, how can we increase the commercial value of the species. And there's some examples of species that at this time don't have any commercial value, but that are rich in proteins, good fats, healthy fats, and with sensorial perception low, because people don't know, but they are very good to eat. We have red gurnard, blue jack mackerel, trigalira, some of the Portuguese species that we can find in our coast. They are abundant, but they don't have commercial value. So they are bycatches, which are not very good for our ecosystem. And so, therefore, research and develop to promote undervalued seafood consumption, reformulation of food products to the consumer nutritional needs, and we need to encourage more waste utilization of food processing industry while decreasing its environmental footprint is, of course, of utmost importance. So we start to do some work combining the emerging technology with traditional marine research. And if we look and have a search on 3D printing field, we'll find a lot of information. In recent years, numerous studies on 3D food printing have demonstrated the value of this technology. However, adapting the existing technology in the food sector has a lot of challenge because food materials often consist of many different components with distinct properties, so it's not so easy to use as the base for the the 3D printing field. Normally it's applied to the sweet foods because it's easier, but it should be looked and be thought to develop nutritional food and healthy food. And you can see the number of publications, and this is an innovative and some way disruptive technology that is growing, the number of publication. People are getting very interested in this area in the food sector. But there's a lot of challenge. So we need to study the technology, to optimize the technology, but we need to increase the food that can be used, that is printable, and that's the challenge. And so we need to, first we have the materials, we have the printable materials, lots of sugar, we have the non-printable materials that are very healthy, and then we have the alternative materials. We need first to choose the materials, to do the formulation, to transform these materials in printable foods. Then we have to modeling, choose the equipment, decide the model. Then we have the printing, and then we have the post-processing technology. Of course, this technology presents some advantage and limitation, and some of the advantage is, of course, the food waste reduction and the potential to use alternative sources of materials, but some limitations related to consumer perceptions. We need to increase the consumer perception and see if people will be able to buy it, but also the low number of compatible materials. So we need to work on this. First of all, work together with the consumers, but also to increase the number of foods that can be printable. And normally this technology is used to develop shapes for chocolate and pasta products for children, not healthy, but very appealing shapes. But then we need to look in a different way and develop foods that can be tailored to the individual needs, incorporating required nutrients, while retaining the requirements to be visually pleasant and, of course, sensorially pleasure. And we also can have a look for the aging population that have some difficulties to eat some specific foods. And of course, there's a lot of challenge. Despite the many recent advances in food printing technology, there's a lot of challenge, and that's why we need to still do some research and work on that, because we need to change the way we eat. And so the new technology will be very important to maintain the sustainability of the foods. So we need to invest in new technology to produce new type of foods. So we need to develop this process, but at this moment the process is very slow. So we need to increase the speed for mass production. And also people should be aware of this technology, but also should be aware of the sustainability of the food sector and the foods that we are eating nowadays. And we have a limited printable materials, but we are working and we can change, we can turn these non-printable foods in printable foods by mixing them with some alternative ingredients. On the other hand, we can use microencapsulation or also in electrospinning to introduce functional ingredients in the food formulation exactly in the position that we want, giving some textural properties, but also increase the bioavailability of these functional ingredients. So there's a lot of challenges, but there's a lot of potential to develop new food products. We have here 2 PhD students that are working on this area. Tatiana, that is working on designing functional food by 3D printing develop food structure for optimal bioaccessibility of nutrients, and Frederica that is working using marine resources as food material for 3D printing. First, we start to characterize the national market and the consumer perception to see what type of foods people want to see developed by 3D printing. So we need to understand, and we need to focus on the type of products that they want to buy, or they will be able to buy, or they want to buy. So we did an online survey of 370 people online because of the COVID in the mainland Portugal. And I'm just showing some of the results that we got. We asked if the people will be willing to try food produced in 3D printers, and we can see that most of the people are very willing or are willing. So that's a good result. And this opens an opportunity to invest in this technology. And then we just ask what raw material do people consider suitable for creating this type of product. And people identify vegetables and fruits, byproducts, and also cereals, but also fish without commercial values, and also dairy products. So they look in a global way, and also include the byproducts of the agro-food system. And then what they, if the 3D food was nutritional rich and then an equal existing product on the market, comparing the traditional food with the innovative food produced by a 3D printer, what they want to buy. And more than 50% or almost 55% of consumers indicate that if the 3D food printed were nutritional rich and an equal or existing product on the market, they will be willing to buy it. So people don't seem very, it's not difficult to introduce this type of the products in the market. And there's difference in the gender influence and the knowledge of these products. So, and now we start to design and develop some printable formulations. Then we have to optimize the process and the process, evaluate the nutritional characterization, and we are planning to do 2 different case studies: 3D constructs tailored for vegans and 3D constructs seafood based. I can show you some preliminary results. This is the seafood snacks. We are just trying to see if we can use seafood as a printable material, and you can see difference on the shapes. We started with more difficulties, and the shape changed the snack, or the snack changed the shape along during the time. But then you can see that we are increasing the knowledge, and the shapes are getting a little bit better over the work. And there's also some preliminary tests and results using the formulation based on fruit and also microalgae. And then it seems like a marmalade, or like yes, something related to that. And you can see that the first preliminary test doesn't get any shape, any specific shape, but then we are getting better. We are optimizing the formulations, and now we are getting some texture and also some structure that maintains along the time. And so I give you some final remarks related to this area. So first of all, don't forget that fish discards are a worldwide phenomenon resulting from fisheries, and have been of great concern on the part of all the players. Seafood byproducts or undervalued species are very rich in proteins and other nutrients, and have a positive effect on human health. So we should increase the number of seafoods that we include in our diet. Algae are also a great source of nutrients and bioactive compounds and have a lot of potential to be applied in functional or fortified foods. 3D printing, which is an additive manufacturing technology, opens new doors to develop innovative strategy for valorization of undervalued species, but also byproducts from other sector, aiming at of maximizing the return on fishing captures, but also contributing to the long-term environmental, economic, and social sustainability. Also, this technology, the 3D printing technology, as a technology that builds product through a layer-by-layer approach, can help to promote the consumption of alternative nutrition source, namely algae, by the general population through nutrient incorporation between layers, strengthening the food products without their presence being noticed. And thank you all for the opportunity to share our work with you. And I've just finished.
Okay, thank you, Maria Manuel, for your very clarifying and inspiring presentation. There's time for some questions. Okay, Professor Mitchell.
Maria, lovely to see you. In your poll, the survey that you did,
Yes.
do you have any idea of what the results, what the general results are for the adoption of any new technology? Because perhaps, well, if we make a survey of people and we are asking them, do they want to do something different? I'd imagine there's probably a fairly general answer that maybe half the people do, which means in your survey, probably all of those people who would will.
Yes, actually, we did a lot of other questions. First of all, we start to do some questions about the functional foods or the fortified foods, to know if people consume normally fortified food, what type of food, if they take care of the consumption, and if they have some questions related to the healthy food. Then we just ask for emerging and innovative technologies. And we have also asked if they know the 3D printing technology at all. People say, yes, we know. But then when we ask for some results I didn't show, when we ask if they know the 3D printing to develop new foods, most of the people doesn't know. So people are not very familiar with the technology, but it seems that people don't mind to try this type of foods. Normally, when we use some omics or other or high pressures technology, people relate this technology with non-healthy food or with some toxic food. But what we found was that people see this technology as a healthy technology to develop fortified foods that can be a good alternative for the traditional food processing.
Okay.
I don't know if I answer your question.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, the survey. Thank you.
Yes, it was just the first, it was a first survey just to see, okay, people know the technology, don't know. What type of food people will be most willing to buy? It's like a snack, it's like a cake, it will be just to know what people are looking and what will be easy to introduce in the market. Just to define the case studies. Okay, we see snacks will be a good choice, healthy snacks. And then we need to define the shape and so on. And you know much more than me about this topic.
because I find it interesting to think about how much culture plays in our food. So when we eat a fish, because I come from a culture where we wouldn't normally be presented with the fish with the head and the bones. It's and so I can tolerate occasionally eating a fish and having to pick out the flesh amongst the bones, but maybe in another culture, people really enjoy that. And so if you were to 3D print a fish, you know, I know that's not what you're suggesting, but if you were to 3D print a fish, do you need to print the bones so that it's hard to find the flesh? Or would it be reasonable just to present it as a fillet, you know, in that way?
Yes, I understand, but people don't really know what they want to see in the dish, because this is so new that people don't really know what they want to see or what they want to eat. So they think, okay, should be a healthy technology. Start to do something we can taste and we can try, we can buy, but we need to think some question related to that. What will be the shape of the printing product? There's a lot of challenges, but we need to change the way we don't need. We can't have anymore the whole fish in the dish to eat. We need to one fish should feed a lot of people, not only one person. But we don't know yet. We are just trying to do some formulations and see if we can use it and see if they can maintain the shape after doing some tests, very preliminary tests.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was very interesting. I think it's very interesting to consider the consumer's perception, because normally it's not taken into consideration. And I don't know if there was a question, what was the price that people were willing to pay, because probably it's more expensive than normal food, to say so.
I don't think that should be a problem. Of course, it will be. It was not a question because we don't even know the price of the technology, but the price will be the technology, because the formulations per se will not be so expensive, because we can use some byproducts and you can use some non-traditional foods that of course has low commercial value. So I don't think that will be so expensive. And this can be also seen, as I've already discussed with the Professor Geoffrey, as can be very important to to some hospitals that can have some specific tailored food for some specific needs, but also to the oldest people that have some problems with the swelling of foods. And NASA is working very hard on this technology because they need to have specific foods with specific nutritional components and without many space to bring them in the space. So this also is a technology that NASA is working very hard on that.
Okay, and just a note, because at the beginning we were noting that it would be very difficult to process the healthy food, but in the end, with the pictures that you showed about the fruit and the microalgae, it was quite impressive. It was really appealing. I will eat that without thinking twice.
I don't know how to say in English. I just marmelada, maybe marmalade. I don't know, but it was more or less like that. And we are trying to do some snacks related to marmalade or gomas, something related to that, and related to the nutrients and functional components. You can encapsulate them, and then you can put them exactly on you want to improve the texture and also to improve the functionality and maintain the functionality during the time.
Okay, thank you so much. thank you again for your presentation. It was really delicious to look at all those dishes. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And now, next we'll have Thelma Maria da Encarnação from University de Coimbra and PT Science. And we'll have a presentation entitled Microalgae Biorefinery, High Value Products from Bioremediation Processes.
Hello.
Hello, Thelma. I'll just.
How do you convert this into this? Well, I will start from the beginning. Good afternoon, and it is a pleasure to participate in this conference in RESIM, and I wish to thank you. I will start to share the screen.
It's great. Yeah.
You can, you see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we have entered in a new era. We humans are altering the planet, including long-term global geological processes at an increasing rate. But these changes are not just on the face of the earth. We pollute the air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we drink. In 2005, the Environmental Working Group found an average of 200 industrial chemicals and pollutants in umbilical cord blood. Tests revealed a total of 287 chemicals. Among them were chemicals banned by the Stockholm Convention. Of the 287 chemicals detected, we know that 180 cause cancer in humans or animals, 217 are toxic to the brain and nervous system, and 208 cause birth defects or abnormal development. Chemical exposure begins in the womb and can have a dramatic effect later in life. Certain environmental chemical pollutant can cause such effect weeks, months, or even years later after exposure. EDCs, like hormones, are active at very low doses, induce a range of adverse effects, and pose a global health threat, and we are not assessing properly this. Hormone-related diseases are increasing globally, and in the European Union alone, the total costs associated are about 630 billion per year. According to the Health and Environmental Alliance report, by reducing the EDC's exposure, savings up 31 billion per year are possible. Extrogenic EDCs comes from a variety of sources. They are in our everyday product, and it's estimated that 20% of the total dietary exposure to chemicals come from drinking water. Several environmental organic chemicals, such as pharmaceutical, plasticizer, persistent organic pollutants, are not eliminated by conventional treatment methods. These can persist in the environment, bioaccumulate through the food web, and through the urban cycle of water reach drinking water. Through the urban cycle of water, we increase our chemical burden. We also increase our chemical burden through trophic magnification of the food chain, where there is a progressive greater accumulation of a pollutant from one trophic level to another along the food chain. Therefore, the higher the trophic level in the food chain, the higher the concentration of non-biodegradable substance, and eventually reaching our plate. And that brings us to microalgae. Microalgae are fascinating organisms. They are unicellular photosynthetic microorganisms that convert CO2 into a diversity of biochemical products, particularly lipids, proteins, and carbohydrates. Microalgae are the basis of the food chain. They are natural filters. Therefore, the pollutant presence in the water will be magnified through the food chain. This video shows a rotifer feeding on microalgae. These are the first food of fish and are eaten by a variety of predators, leading to the biomagnification of pollutants. But this specificity could be used for our benefit. Microalgae remove pollutants from water and have the advantage of fast growth. They also frequently have higher lipid content. Many microalgae naturally store energy as oil when the lack of nutrients make them unable to use the energy for normal growth. Consequently, by manipulating nutrients and other growth conditions, it is possible to promote this oil production. So, what is the strategy? We believe that increasing the value of the biomass with innovative application with high value, it is faster to implement the bioremediation using algae in wastewater treatment plants or industries, for example. To address the air and water pollution, one possible solution is to combine the existing technologies with the bioremediation using algae. An example of cost reduction is to use a biorefinery model for microalgae cultivation and the production of multiple product streams to make microalgal biomass an economical, feasible resource. So a hypothesis is formulated. Are microalgae really efficient in removing pollutants? We already know that microalgae capture greenhouse gases, nutrients such as nitrates and phosphates and heavy metals, but will they be able to efficiently remove EDCs from water? And the question, how to add more value to this biomass? Well, in preliminary experiments, we tested the bioremediation using one pharmaceutical, alprazolam. Remarkably, microalgae removed from water 100% of the pollutant. And we thought microalgae will be the solution for all the problems in the world. Well, then we started with the planned research and we discovered that it was not so quite simple. Microalgae can indeed remove pollutants from water, but with different efficiency, as we'll see next. Wastewater is varied and complex. It varies depending on geography, season, and weather. In this specific study, we use artificial wastewater and the real industrial wastewater. We opt for representative pharmaceuticals most frequently detected in the environment: paracetamol and ibuprofen, one persistent pharmaceutical, olanzapine, and the pesticide imidacloprid. This is one of the main responsible for the decline of bee population. Imidacloprid was banned in Europe in 2018, but it still persists in the environment. We also tested a complex industrial wastewater. These contain organic persistent pollutants, benzene, toluene, heavy metals, nano and microplastics. Then methods were developed, optimized and validated, such as rapid methods for the simultaneous determination of the pollutants. And we proceed for the bioremediation. We tested each pharmaceutical separately and in mixture and defined the bioremediation time as a function of cell survival. We saw that in the case of free cells, in the presence of 4 pharmaceutical, Nanochloropsis remained as a viable population for at least 12 days. In contrast, immobilized cells started to fade from 6th day on, and no viable cells are observed at the end of the experiment. Although PVA is considered to be biocompatible, the experiment shows that this could be due to the limitation in the diffusion of nutrients through the bed structure. In the evaluation of each of each individual pharmaceutical, the most harmful one of the immobilized cells was ibuprofen. After 4 days, cells were completely faded, indicated the breakdown of the culture. The control group, with no pharmaceutical added to the medium, showed some fading after 4 days. The removal of paracetamol after was significantly higher in immobilized cells, however, showed an increase after 60 hours of culture. Ibuprofen showed the same behavior. This increase induced some fraction of the PVA beads have dissolved with the probably release of the pollutants in the medium again. Leakage of cells from the beads was also observed. Olanzapine displayed a different scenario, in particular with the control group, where there was a drastic reduction for the concentration of olanzapine. This will be discussed in the next slide. In the group of free cells, olanzapine was removed around 30 micrograms per milliliters after 60 hours of cultures, suggesting the more affinity to the molecule of olanzapine than the molecules of paracetamol and ibuprofen, presumably reflecting the electrostatic interaction and other forces between them and the components of the membrane. We also tested imidacloprid. We studied several variables such as aeration, light concentration, and UV degradation. No degradation of imidacloprid by UV occurred. It is stable under room temperature and light conditions. We therefore concluded that the bioremediation of imidacloprid by nanochloropsis was sufficient in the presence of light, grow autotrophically, and in the first 20 hours. The aeration affects the removal of pollutants. The removal of pollutants from water is, to some extent, enhanced by aeration, as we can see here with the control group. Also, in the HPLC chromatogram, the appearance of additional and unidentified peaks suggested that the biotransformation of imidacloprid might occur. Quantitatively, data regarding compounds in the industrial wastewater is not presented here because this is still ongoing, perhaps on RESIM 2023. The effect of pollutants on the microalgae population was evaluated. The pollutant removal experiment started in the stationary phase of growth. We choose to start the bioremediation experiments in this stage because we wanted a very high concentration, very high population, and short times of bioremediation. In the case of imidacloprid, the drastic decreases in the population in both control and sample could be attributed to cell disruption due to the centrifugation treatment. A decrease in the population, the dead phase, is observed after 2 days of cultivation. Both control and sample produce negative specific growth rates. Culture of nanochloropsis immobilized in PVA and grow in the presence of pharmaceutical had a similar growth in the first 12 hours and then decreased continuously until the end of the experiments. The highest growth was obtained in free cells without the presence of pharmaceuticals, during which after 36 hours of culture. As is usual to say, seeing is believing. So I bring here some photograph of our species. The marine species Nanochloropsis possess a characteristic cell structure. The cell relies on a big red here, chloroplast, which occupies more than half of the cell when cultivated in replete nitrogen culture. Cells grown in the presence of alprazolam showed a homogeneous fluorescence, indicated the diffusion of the pollutant to the cell. Observation showed also fluorescence of olazapine located inside of the cells. Regarding imidacloprid, spots are observed, confirming the internalization of the insecticide. With respect to the size of chloroplast, indicated that cells exposed to imidacloprid have their chloroplasts reduced. It has been reported that imidacloprid affects the photosynthesis of the treated plant and may lead to the disruption of chloroplast. The same happens here in microalgae. As for industrial wastewater, it is very interesting to observe that all cells become fluorescent. This particular wastewater also contains photochromatic compounds. I believe that's why they show this aspect. After the bioremediation process, we need to proceed to the economic valorization of biomass. And we will focus on two aspects, lipid production and application. But first, to avoid using toxic organic solvents in the lipid extraction step, our group developed a new method for the monitoring of lipid production. A new highly lipophilic molecule was synthesized. What we are seeing here is the green fluorescence corresponding to lipid bodies. We combined the new fluorescent dye, body PDC12, highly lipophilic, with image analysis software. The analysis of fluorescence image and the volume determination of lipid bodies were performed resorting to the public domain software ImageJ. Therefore, with this method, we can visualize and quantify the lipid production over time with no need to use organic solvent extraction and time-consuming methods. With this method, we study the lipid production based on variation in nitrates and salinity concentration. With the best condition, we managed to achieve 80% of dry weight of lipid content. This is considered the green gold of the future. Microalgae oil can be used for several applications, such as resins, binders, lubricants, surfactants, and so on. This is a building block. After the bioremediation using algae, the maximization of lipids and their extraction, it is possible to obtain feedstock for producing PLA, polylactic acid. We can use several fractions of the cell to produce several products in a cascade approach. So after the extraction of lipids, the lipid-free residue can be neutralized and concentrated to sugars, which can be fermented by a wide range of microorganisms. And the product obtained from the fermentation is the lactic acid, which is an important bio-based block for producing PLA. We focused on the final stage of all value chain in the circular economy. The currently scenario in microalgae market today is more directed to food supplements and feeds. Few commercial profitable applications exist in the chemical industry. In general, regarding chemical industry, the biomass generated in the bioremediation process has single-use, low-value bioplastic as application. Therefore, we seek to value this biomass by applying it to a high-value product such as ophthalmic lenses. So we injected a prototype and carried out some tests. The feasibility of polylactic acid for application in advanced optical products was assessed through thermal and optical analysis. We obtained a good mechanical properties and excellent optical performance, and with a particular advantage. It does not become yellow over time, which is a common in petroleum-based lenses, which represents a problem with stocks in companies. So to conclude, sorry, I forgot to disconnect the sound. A new approach is proposed for bioremediation using algae, improving water quality, optimizing the production, and converting pollution into high-value products. This video was records. So this is a multidisciplinary project that raised more questions than answers, such as how to improve the stability and integrity of the beads, what metabolites are produced, are they innocuous? What factors influence the removal efficiencies? What green additives are needed? Can we extract additives, synthesize additive to add in the bio-based products? Which more high-value bio-based products are possible? And most important, how to impact society and policy? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Thelma, for your fascinating presentation. We have time for some questions now. Okay, no questions.
This does not agree with my last slide that raised more questions than answered.
Yeah, I think you already made all the good questions. It was a really good presentation. Though.
Thank you. Thank you all.
No presentation. So thank you again. And
Thank you.
And we'll continue to our next presenter, which is with Barbara Lamolinara from Center for Transdisciplinary Development Studies from University of Trás-os-Montes e Alto Douro, Portugal, with a presentation entitled The Circular Business Models as Strategic Tools for a Sustainable Development.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear it.
Okay, I will share my screen. Okay, so hello everybody, I'm Barbara Lamolinara. I am a PhD student in agribusiness and sustainability, and today I will present a part of my work, of my thesis work, about circular business models, which are strategic tools for sustainable development. So what is the objective of this presentation today? Just to have a description and a summary of what a circular business model is, and understand why it is important and it is a tool for company to achieve sustainability. The reason of our focus is because nowadays the companies need to change fast, need to adapt fast to the new challenges that they are facing, for example, Industry 4.0 or sustainable goals, etc. So company needs to have a sustainable development. Moreover, the consumer are becoming more exigent. They want green products. They are aware of environmental issues. So they need to change, the businesses need to change their strategy in green strategies. Moreover, there is this need to innovate a business model because we need to respect and respond to the sustainable development goals of the United Nations by 2030. Okay, so just to recall briefly, today we all repeated the basic concept of sustainability and circular economy, etc. But just to recall to the idea that when we talk about sustainability, we are not just thinking about environment, but as well to the economic and social aspects. So what does it mean? That we can have a green product, which is good for the environment, but it can be bad for the economical aspect of the company. So because maybe it's too expensive to produce it, or it's not profitable. So we should pay attention to this detail. And we can measure the performance of a company in sustainability with indicators, for example, both for environment, for economical aspect, and for the social part. Instead, when we talk about circular economy, we see it as a business paradigm to achieve sustainability. So to be sustainable, we need to change our economy from a linear one to a circular one. We are now a little bit in the middle, as we can see in this nice image. We are nowadays more or less in the image in the middle. So we have some feedback loops, but somehow we are not completely circular in our economy, but we tend to be circular. So we are going from a concept of end of life to a concept described already in 2002, which is defined from cradle to cradle. So it's where we are going in the future. That means that the transition from linear to circular is essential for the company development and also for their survival, of course. If they do not green or they do not circular, they could finish somehow their business soon. So as somebody may remember that we had just few years ago the concept of the 3 R's of the sustainable economy. Today we have like 10 R's. So when we talk about circular economy, we are talking about smarter supply chains, extend the lifespan of a product, have a change in the lifestyle of people. So trying to recycle things, to reuse things, repair them, etc. So now we are expanding the concept of the 3 R's to much more R's in the circular economy. And just to have an idea of a background of what a business model is somehow a business tool that make it easy, fast, comprehensive to all people, even people which are not in the business or social sciences. The idea of the business, communicate the core of the business with a business model or a business model canvas like in this picture. So this is a little bit the framework of this research, and we will go to an innovation of a business model. I mean, when we want to innovate a business model which was linear, we will innovate it in a sustainable way. We will have then a sustainable business model. If we will innovate a business model towards circularity, we will have a circular business model. Of course, we can change a part of the business model, or we can change all the business models. So it depends on the kind of business, of course. Some businesses not possible to change all the business model. Okay, so then to go deep in the concept of circular business model, what we did in our research is basically a literature review. We are using the two most known databases in the literature, in the science literature. And we are using the concept, of course, of circular business model or circularity business model sometimes is referred. So going to in deep to this concept, what is a circular business model? It's basically a business tool, and it's a tool which combines circular economy concept, innovation concept, and sustainability and sustainable business model concept. So mixing all together, we have a circular business model. What is the aim of a circular business model? The circular business model wants to operationalize, to make it real somehow, to make it happen, a circular economy strategy. And it wants to help improve sustainability performances. So it is a model which is based on a closed loop value chain. And it has, as well as aim, the one of valorization of residues, of creating value from waste. In this way, it can lead companies to a new economy, to a new business, to a new sustainable business for their companies. What we know about circular business model in literature. In this case, we are talking about scientific literature. We know that the expression circular business model was emerged already a few years ago in 2006, but then actually was in literature discussed starting from 2014 with a deep interest, and as we can see, it increased exponentially in the last years. And it's not easy to summarize or have just one definition of circular business models, because there are many different in literature. But this scheme can somehow summarize what happens when we have a business model. We are innovating it in a sustainability way. So we will have a sustainable business model. And then again, we will innovate it with circular solution, and we will have a circular business model. So we can assume from this picture, for example, that circular business model is somehow a subcategory or a consequence of sustainable business model. But as we can see here in this image, we have two situations. One is the ideal situation, where we are working towards this ideal situation. I think that in the future we will be here. So we have the business model, we innovate the business model with sustainability, and we will have a sustainable business model. Then when we are using circular practices, we will have a complete circular business model, which is at the same time so sustainable, it is innovative, and it is, of course, a business model. But today we are still in the second picture, where you can notice that there is a part of this circular business model and circular practices sphere where they are not included in the sustainable business model. Why? Because there are now companies which are starting, they are startups or business that they are trying to be circular, and going circular means, as it is everything new, that can be not profitable for the company yet. So we have company now which are trying to design a business which is circular, but is not yet profitable somehow, or it can still be difficult for them because legislation is not changing at the same speed as technology and innovation in this field. So for now, we have still a small part of company going circular, which are not that sustainable in terms of economic profit. That's why they are not sustainable. They are green, but they are not sustainable economically yet. But they will be in the future as well, as soon as some tax scheme or some incentives will help them, and the business will grow, and we will come to the first picture, to the ideal situation. Of course, the business model is not just about reuse a residue. We have different kind of business model. We have, for example, the case of sharing a product, somehow the car sharing, for example. We have a business model based on the product as a service, for example, the lease of a product. So when we think about circular business model, it's easy to think that it's just about taking garbage and make it a new, I don't know, plastic product. But it's not just this. We can think about eco-design. So to green design, all it is part of circular business model when we want to design a product which will have a long life, which will minimize the waste, will eliminate material leakage, or we can think about, for example, businesses that are based on the repairability of product, of reselling used product. All is part of circular business models. That's why now we are talking about models and not model, because there are different kind. And as you can see in this picture, every kind of circular business model can be applied in all the supply chain or in just one part of the supply chain. It doesn't matter, it will be always circular business models. And in some case, for example, the case of product as a service, it can be applied in all the supply chain, as you can see. Now in this picture, it seems a little bit confused, but it's a representation of how this kind of business model can interact or can act in a part of the life cycle of a product, of all the life cycles of, if we think about, for example, sharing of a product, we will have it in the lifespan of the product, which is the product use. We will not have it in the manufacturing of the product. Okay, so this picture is showing where in the supply chain or in the life cycle of a product, this business model can be somehow applied. Then nowadays, if we would like to make a business canvas for a circular business model, we can find different configuration in the web. There is still not a standard way of represent a circular business model canvas, for example. But what we need to take in consideration will be the design, of course, the use we want to have, the circular goal we want to achieve, which materials we are used, if they are green or not, what is the end of life of the product, and all the logistic, distribution, production, and of course innovation when we think about new technology for our business. Here I will present other two canvas for circular business model. This is similar to the previous one. And then we have another one. This one, it's a little bit similar, more similar to the traditional business model canvas, but as we can notice, we have a part of sustainability impact. So we will have the requirement for sustainability, we will have the benefit of sustainability, and as well we will have an ecosystem level of the business. Why? Because we will see sooner, some slides later, that the ecosystem is essential for a circular business model. The ecosystem, I mean the business ecosystem. Here I will present two business cases of circular business model, which are different in the sense that in this case we have the circular business model of the NIAM company. The NIAM project is a Portuguese startup which create mushroom from the residues of coffees. From cafe, they collect the coffee residues, then they make it as a coffee grounds, they make it as a way to grow the mushroom, they sell the mushrooms, and then they reuse it, use it as a fertilizer as well for a new growing fruits, vegetable, etc. So this is a business which is completely circular and is a Portuguese example. Then we have the concept of sharing and product as a services, as everybody knows the Uber example. This is circular economy as well. So we are sharing a car, and we have, I don't know, this small scooter or renting car, sharing car. So here we have represented two concepts, that is the product as a service and the sharing of products. What are, according to our research, which are the enablers for a good circular business model, for a success of circular business models? We have identified some enablers. One and fundamental is the collaboration among all the stakeholders involved in the circular flow. So we have the share of responsibilities between stakeholders. We have the collaboration, a common commitment. This is a key for the success of a circular business model. We have as well we need to educate companies and entrepreneurs about the circular concept. We saw that when there are governmental incentives, it is much more easier to go circular. So companies can go circular, can start to go circular thanks to project and incentives. And as well, we saw that somehow it's important to have the social acceptance. Why? Because, for example, in the case of anaerobic digestion and the fertilizer coming from the sludge of anaerobic digestion, if farmers are not aware about the good profit they can have, the advantages they can have from this kind of garbage, they will not use it as a fertilizer. If they will not accept the sludge, so the digestate, as a good product, as a safe product, they will not use it, and then it will be useless to produce sludge if farmers will not use it as fertilizer. So there will be no circularity because these farmers will not accept this product as safe or as good for them. But for example, in our interesting research in India, so that there are some community which are not accepting fertilizer from some anaerobic digestion plants because they are using manure or excrement, and they don't want to use this excrement as fertilizer. So in some community there could be also a cultural reason of not using a kind of waste, and this is important to take in consideration where we are thinking about using a type of residues. And then what we saw as well is that clusters are important for circular economy. So it means that in a local environment, circular business model works better because there is no point, for example, in a circular community, if we need to transport some waste from Portugal to France and then make it manufacturing, I don't know, in Italy, etc. But local cluster works better for the success of a circular business model. Of course, when public support helps companies with incentives or taxes or some schemes, this can help a lot to go circular. On the other hand, which are the barriers of circular business model? One of the most important is, of course, the legislation in governments, because somehow it cannot be as changing as fast as technologies and innovation. So in some countries, for example, legislation for using anaerobic digestion sludge from biogas plant is not that clear. So farmers cannot use it as fertilizer somehow for legislation reason or for tax reason somehow. It can be more advantageous to use a chemical fertilizer instead of natural fertilizer. So we need to pay attention to these two aspects. Of course, it is as well a barrier of circular business model is the scalability, because sometimes it can work at us in a small company or in a local company, and then when we want to make it bigger, to scale up, or to replicate what we do in a small value chain, in a big value chain, it can be difficult. As well as it is important that the lack of knowledge and information somehow is a barrier as well for the circular business model, because this is discussed a lot in academia, but somehow we can go in a company and ask for a circular business model and they don't know the concept. Maybe they apply it, but they don't know it really well, because this is mainly discussed in the academic world. So we need a link between academia and companies to operationalize then the circular business model. So at the end, what is important for a success of circular business model, which are the two key players of it, are of course the government with legislation, tax scheme, etc., and companies. So they are the two key players. And they why governments? Because governments can redesign legislation to make it easier and most advantageous to use residue instead of new raw material, for example. To conclude, so what we have seen today, the first thing is that the circular business model is itself a sustainable business model when it applies circular strategies, but the boundaries between circular and sustainable are not that strict. So somehow we can have some confusion if a business model is sustainable or circular or both. Then what we see that there is not just one kind of business model, but we have different ones. So it's not just using residue, but it can be, for example, extending the life of a product with eco-design. As well, we have talked about how circular business models can improve the competitive or the competitive advantage of a company, and how it's important to link universities, consultancy world, entrepreneurial world all together to the success of circular business models, to share the knowledge between them. And as a last point, we see that the circular business model is a tool that will help companies, policymakers to make a transition from a linear to a circular economy, so it can make the transition real. Now, the team of this research is represented by me as PhD student, and then my supervisors, which are Professor Mario Sergio Teixeira, Professor Cristina Galamba Marreiros, and the Professor Victor Hugo Santos Ferreira. So this is the team of this research. And I would like to acknowledge all the funding institution and my institution, which are hosting me for the research. And thanks you a lot for the attention. I'm available for any question.
Thank you, Barbara. It's a very interesting presentation. We have time for some questions. There are some questions from the audience. Okay, Professor Geoffrey.
Do you see what the idea of these business models as being something that is determined about a company? So in other words, somebody investigates the company and develops the model, or do you see it as being a model that's used internally to drive the transition?
I mean, yes, the circular business model can be somehow, we can have a standard business model, like, okay, we will see how we can change it as other people does it to change it, and we try to adapt our circular business model. We will try to make it circular, or some, and it can be the strength of the company somehow, like, for example, the company of mushroom is making about its business model, its strength. So it's almost an advertisement, is their strong point. And then on the other end, we have some department of other company try to go in circular, so they are not sharing their circular business model. Somehow they could even don't know that they have a circular practices recognized as a circular business model. They could even not make us a business model canvas, but they are going circular as well. Just they are not recognize it as a business model, or they are not sharing it, or they are just working on that in another way. I don't know if I get well the question. If I replied as you to your doubts.
Yes, well, this morning, Professor Ramakrishnan talked about some ISO standard that he was involved in, which was about, I mean, it wasn't exactly what you're talking about, but which was about a sustainability stamp of approval, you know, so in the sense that people in the past have things which have been marked as biodegradable or compostable or such things, or even products marked made from recycled plastics when they only contain a few percent, you know, and so there needs to be standards in these. And so I'm thinking, is the biggest value to the company to drive it in that direction, or is it more to be able to proclaim its credentials, as in the way the company you mentioned, Mushroom?
I mean, for example, of course, one of the objectives is to have a standard circular business model. There are some, for example, some foundation that are providing a standard circular business model, but it's not always possible to define a strict standard, because every business is different. So in the agribusiness, we will not have the same circular business model of an IT company, for example. So there are guidelines in the McAllen Foundation, for example, but they are somehow generic in a way that they could apply in all kind of sector. Then of course every sector should have its own canvas, its own specific one, because they need some input from I don't know, agriculture, other need, which has they need to respect some kind of law, some legislation. Instead, other sectors like IT, they need to respect other kind of legislation. So we have recommendation, of course, of organization, but there is not the ultimate final circular canvas.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And let's see if there are more questions. Okay, thank you, Barbara, again for your very interesting presentation.
Thank you so much
now-
for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you. And now let's welcome our next presenter, who is Ricardo Simões from Polytechnic Institute of Cavado and Ave from Barcelos, with a presentation entitled Application of Circularity Microindicators to Plastic Products in Various Industrial Sectors. Okay. Não precisa.
É dois? Ok. É este, estou a partilhar. Já estou. Perfeito. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can see the presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about our work, about application of circularity microindicators to plastic materials in various industrial sectors. This is the work essentially of Joana Matos, our PhD student, that I'm coordinating together with my colleague Carla Martins at the University of Minho. I'm Ricardo Simões from IPCA in the north of Portugal, and I'm polymer engineering by training, material scientist, and over the last decade or so, I've been working mostly around the application of materials and sustainability approaches to different products in the context of product development. So the objective of this work is really to clarify how the concepts and implementation of circular economy can be applied to plastics in different industrial sectors. And we want to identify the most relevant micro indicators in 9 major sectors of applications of plastics. And with this, we hope to help guide industry and the adoption of these micro indicators for circularity to plastic products, which is still very little introduced nowadays in the industrial sectors. So we all know how much plastic has been growing in demand. Just in 2020, there was around 50 million tons of plastics being converted into products. This is a lot in the packaging industry. It's a major sector of pollution or producing waste from plastics, and then building and construction and several others. So as was already addressed in several talks today, we have to in some way improve the situation. We have to reduce the amount of waste generated, and we have to reduce the amount of waste which is not treated and is causing the environmental crisis where we live nowadays. So we need to shift towards a more sustainable future. And we know that a few industrial sectors are particularly responsible for the amount of waste that is generated. In fact, polyolefins, PET and PVC are some of the most widely used polymers in this market. So we can pinpoint a few of the key issues, which are some industrial sectors and obviously some plastics. Now, this all leads into the societal use of plastics. So the material is never the problem. The material is the solution. The problem is how we handle and how we treat waste. So in plastic products, for example, the key issue is that people treat this very irresponsibly. So we throw plastic products away in the ground, the middle of the forest. We throw it to the rivers, and so this is not a reasonable way of handling waste. Of course, with some other materials, we value the material itself much more, and we keep it or we deliver it somewhere. But with plastics being cheap, being widely available, they are associated with a low value. And so people do not treat it the same way. So this led to an absolutely irresponsible environmental way of treating plastic, and especially plastic waste. And with the amount of growth in population and economic development, this is totally unsustainable for our planet. So what is one of the many solutions that we require to the pollution crisis? We have to transition into a circular model. And this was described early in the morning. It was just talked about in terms of circular business models in the previous lecture. And this means, in a simplified way, that we have to look at creating cycles of value where material is used and then is reused. If it cannot be directly reused, it's refurbished. If it cannot be refurbished, it is manufactured. And at the worst possible case, it is recycled. But in any way, there's always a way of taking advantage of the waste and handling it as a resource with which we can do something, and minimizing the actual disposal of waste. So this obviously ties into the hierarchies of the R's, as was just said half an hour ago, that we are up to about 10 R's nowadays. Reduce and rethink, I think, is the latest one, which means it is not clearly enough to recycle. In fact, my friend Declan Devine in TUS in Ireland says that when we talk about recycling, we're already losing the battle if that's our solution for the problem. And so we have to shift into smarter strategies for circular economy, and that means keeping the product in circulation, closing cycles, consider waste as a raw material, minimize waste, and return to the economy's value of the material. Now, in this transition, of course, you need tools in order to evaluate how you are progressing, and in order to measure circularity. And you can measure circularity for an entire country, for an ecosystem, for an industrial park, but you can also measure circularity for products. And of course, you can do this through very complex and technical approaches like LCA, and I've been involved in many LCA studies. This requires extreme technical expertise. It took us years to gain some knowledge in terms of doing LCAs properly, and it requires also very well-trained people and a lot of information on the process. Many times industry just doesn't have the information available to do a full LCA, or the time and resources allocated for each product that they have, especially if they have a large portfolio. An approach that tries to mitigate this problem, this limitation, are circularity microindicators. Now, circularity microindicators, for those not very familiar, are small or fairly small indicators that pinpoint usually one or a few aspects of the product's entire life cycle, and which try to very quickly give us an idea of where it is positioned, not just in terms of sustainability, but in terms of circularity, which are two different things. We can have very circular products, and for example, some materials are talked about as being circular, like steel. You can continuously recycle it, or aluminum. The problem is that they're not sustainable, because when you're recycling aluminum, you're expending tremendous amounts of energy, water, etc. That's not sustainable on the long term. It can be on a very short term, but so being circular is not being sustainable. And my struggle over the last 2 years is trying to get a lot of people to study a little bit more the difference between these topics, and that it is not enough to be circular or sustainable. It has to be both. The problem is that there are many micro indicators for circularity developed by a host of different researchers in different places, but these are still in a maturation phase. Many are complex, many are very little documented, are dependent on some information which are not available, or only focus, for example, on the end of life or they focus only on production and leave a lot, some of dimensions also. So clearly it is difficult nowadays if a certain plastic processing company, for example, wants to employ them. This is not trivial. And of course, please excuse that I'm focusing on plastics today, because this could be obviously applicable to all different families of materials, but by training, by practice, I'm involved only in plastics, and it's the only industry I can talk about. But of course, it's more or less transversal. Now, a few years ago, just a couple of years ago, Christensen and Mozart did a great job. They went into the literature and found about 30 micro indicators, and they classified them into 9 categories for circular economy. Okay, so a few indicators, as you can see, are scattered through these different aspects of life cycle. Most or the larger amount are in recycling, and it's obvious. We know there are a lot of people studying recycling from different points of view. A lot obviously are end of life management. It's expected because it's something that people worry about when they think about sustainability. But you can see that there are also some connected, for example, with extension of lifetime of products, or disassembly in terms of complex assemblies, or resource efficiency. So there are indicators focusing on all these things. But the problem is these were not created in a logical way. So these were randomly proposed in literature by different groups working independently along years. And so, as you can imagine, there's a wide dispersion in terms of how they operate, the principles behind them. So there's very little connecting them. So some of them are quantitative, some are qualitative, some are actually what they call composite indicators, meaning they combine different indicators together. Some are very easy to calculate, but very superficial. Others are very in-depth, but difficult. And so it's very difficult if somebody suddenly says, okay, let's go and calculate circularity of my product. Where do they start? There's this huge range. Do they go into the literature and try to find information on this? There's a huge barrier, an entry gap, which is very difficult to go around. So what we have been trying to do, and what we are now trying to put down, and Joanna's main PhD challenge, is we are trying to create guidelines into how do you put this into practice, hoping that at some point they will become more standardized like LCA are. So there's a norm for LCA, European legislation, and a standard, international standard, and so everyone can understand an LCA study and can do an LCA study following the legislation or the regulation in this case. But there's absolutely nothing in terms of standardization for micro indicators, nothing at all. And so this is an example of what we've done. For example, for the quantitative indicators, the one that gives us a number, okay, at the end, you can see we've looked at, can we apply, for example, first one, RPI, can we apply this to packaging products, to electrical and electronic products, which are usually carcasses, to medical field products, etc. And we concluded a few indicators. For example, these first 3, RPI, MCI, and VRE. VRE is on the value of the product, MCI is on material, and RPI is on the reuse, recycle. So these 3, they can essentially be used to all sectors. The problem is, for example, RVE is purely economic. And so the calculation of it doesn't take into account sustainability, only value, let's say, sales values versus material costs and things like that. And so it's very simplistic. It doesn't really evaluate circularity. Another one, EVR, that you can see there as orange from start to end, so in all sectors, is extremely difficult for a company to implement because it requires first having a full LCA of the product. So you can only do it after a full LCA. So this is out of reach for the majority of products. Not only that, but it's highly dependent on market costs. So it's highly volatile a long time. Other 2, for example, EDIM and EDT, are on disassembly. These are disassembly time and disassembly efficiency. So these are only applicable, for example, to sectors where usually you have assemblies that can be disassembled at the end. Okay, so they are more focused on the procedure at the end of life and not really evaluating circularity. So essentially they can be used in electronics and automotive. As can be seen here, almost all indicators in general are applicable to automotive transportation. Let's say this can be rail, road, airplanes, and electronic. And why? Because these are sectors where usually people do most of their case studies, where there are a lot of big challenges, and where there's a big preoccupation about sustainability, treatment at end of life, etc. So automotive is one of the sectors that most has been on the news in terms of the sustainability, not only of the vehicles themselves, but of handling at the end of life. And nowadays, in terms of batteries for electric vehicles, which is a totally different thing. So as you can see here, there are clearly sectors to which more people have devoted effort into developing indicators, or were thinking about when they were developing the indicators. And there are sectors where there are a lot of indicators that can be hardly used, and some indicators clearly are very, very specific and only make sense for some products. So overall, we can see if somebody is starting, okay, they should start by looking at MCI and RPI, MCI being the most holistic one. And MCI is actually from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And it was mentioned before today that Ellen MacArthur Foundation has some interesting studies. And one of their projects was on indicators for circularity. And this was the indicator they came up with. And it is very well documented. It is holistic. So this is a great start, okay? But this is the type of information that is found nowhere. And so that's why we're trying to compile it and analyze this. So taking analytic tools instead of quantitative indicators, you can see again the same thing happens. So there here too, like EZWP and CDG, you can apply them to any sector, okay? And they are, in fact, the only ones that we could see applicable to typical products for plastics in buildings and construction, plastics in agriculture, and plastics in the medical sector. EZWP has an issue, which is it only cares about social responsibility. So it tackles nothing in terms of circularity of the product itself. On the other hand, SDEO requires numerical optimization models. So you need somebody that's going to program, and you need heavy calculation behind it. So typically, again, in industry, this would be difficult to employ. TPQ is applicable to any sector, but it doesn't help in decision making. Just tells you what are the options to go, but doesn't help you decide among which you should tackle. EPVR is only focused on disassembly. So as you can see, there are here different indicators, some very specific, some not as specific, but with limited use. And so it's important for industry to understand there are all these tools available, but then depending on their case and what product and what they're interested in terms of sustainability and circularity, this type of approach, we believe, will help them get started into actually evaluating circularity, not just have the goal of improving circularity in general, which essentially usually has been the application of the principles of circular economy. But that's not enough. You have to then understand after 3 years, are you better? Are you not? This product versus that product. So this is what we are proposing here. Okay, and for example, CDG among the analytical tools is probably the more interesting one in terms of evaluating circularity. And the same could be done again for composites. I'll skim through this, okay? We found that CIP is very interesting for all industrial sectors, but on the other hand, we have others that are very limited. DEI, for example, is only on disassembly. RI is very complex, extremely complex. EVC is based on the EVR that I talked before, which requires a full LCA. So again, a few people are going to be able to do this. And so when we look at all of these together, we can see that there are clearly sectors where there are many more indicators available. So the trick becomes, you have 20 available, which ones are you going to use? So it depends, are you trying to, can you change something in terms of production? Can you change something at end of life? For example, are you thinking of implementing a take-back system? Are you thinking about changing the end of life solution? Or can you change the design of the product? For example, make it easier to disassembly. So depending on what you can do and what you want to do, you can use different indicators to evaluate where you are and where you'll end up, okay? And so in terms of indicators, you can see some are green across the spectrum of fields. That makes them much more interesting to understand and be in portfolio of the indicators a company usually employs. On the other hand, there are sectors here where you really only have a few, half a dozen of indicators that are available that make sense for most products in that sector. Of course, it depends. For specific products, they might fall outside the norm, okay? And so we also found some redundant indicators proposed by different people, for example, different indicators only for disassembly. One of them is much more complete than the others. Also, there's this big heterogeneity, make it much difficult for companies to start using these tools unless they have, let's say, a guidelines to start with. And obviously, the most complex application sectors, we found this interesting thing where there are lots of indicators available for those sectors, of the typical products in those sectors, while for others, not that much. And building and construction, agriculture, and medical are the ones harder to employ. So I have here some brief examples that I'll go through in half a minute. For example, you can see here our RPI, the reuse potential indicator, is used. So you are going to classify your product between being closer to waste or closer to a potential resource, okay? And depends on the different technologies available at the end of life. Jumping ahead, the MCI from Ellen MacArthur Foundation. This is very holistic and very interesting, but it requires that you can specify the different material flows, utility function for each step, etc. So it requires much more thinking and compiling much more information about the different stages and quantifying the different stages of the product. VRE, value-based resource efficiency indicator, basically is going to compare the mass and economic value of the different inputs. And so in the end, it's going to basically compare how much you added value on the material by your production. So how much added value it gains by the company. And so I had here a couple more examples, but I'll go through them just for you to see how different and widespread and heterogeneous these are. Okay, so at the end, looking at this, what we find as guidelines based on what indicators take for their calculations are essentially that you need to standardize design and materials. You need to reduce the use of virgin polymers and avoid additives, promote reuse of materials through so as reuse and only recycled and recoverable waste, promote reuse, repair, and reconditioning of products. These are the best way to improve circularity. Promote collection and take-back practices. This is not common nowadays. It's only for a few products. This has to increase tremendously. When I was a kid, it was common to do this take-back, for example, with glass bottles. Then that was lost along the years. Now it's starting to come back, and it has to become the norm in our society that we don't throw everything away as trash. This has to disappear entirely. And we need to adopt energy and environmental friendly production processes. So as a conclusion, among all these indicators that we've looked at, some are very narrow focused and don't look at product life cycle. Many are really not well documented, and it's going to be a barrier for the use of that. And the combination of these factors really makes it difficult for companies even wanting to be able to employ these micro indicators. And there is a large disparity in terms of their application to different industrial sectors and different products. So much work is necessary if we want to have tools that allow calculation of circularity, which we don't nowadays, because measurement of an LCA is not circularity of the products. You can have an excellent or a very low, actually, environmental impact with a very unsustainable solution for a material flow. And so this is not the way to go. We need tools like this, but we need much work in terms of making them easily accessible to industry, which are the ones that are going to need to use them on a daily basis, not academics. So we're working now through a couple of master theses employing these type of tools at companies, and we expect to show those cases and to promote the use of these tools. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your presentation. We have time for some questions now. There are some questions from Professor Joffre.
Could you just say what you mean by a product?
I'm talking about the carcass here around this,
So,
or a dashboard in automotive.
so how does a petrochemical company ever become circular?
These indicators make sense at the company who is producing this, not at the raw material producer, but at the company that is making this and then putting it in the market or selling it to Zoom that is going to put it in the market. So when you're thinking about taking the raw material, creating a product out of it and what end that product is going to have, then these indicators will help you understand how it becomes circular. How does it become circular? For example, the product flows has to come from suppliers who have circular practices. They have to think about the take-back system so that it does not go together with organic waste and everything. So this company could have a take-back system where this is delivered at the electronic store, again at the end of life cycle, and is disassembled, and each of the components as appropriate. So that's how they become more circular, is by thinking at the entire cycle. And that's usually done by the owner of the product, the company who is ordering that it's being made. It cannot be just raw material. The raw material producer naturally has to shift toward more sustainable, renewable sources to help in this entire chain.
Yeah, but the thought that's going through my mind, so you've obviously thought about this a lot more than I have. I've only thought about it in the last 15 minutes, is that it sounds like the people who produce the materials which things are made from are sort of, that's written off, and it's only the products we care about. Whereas actual fact, you know, like if we take, for example, a house as a product, I guess, but the big carbon footprint comes in the cement factory.
Yep, absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
So this is excluded from this process. And so if you're thinking about making a house from concrete, which is very popular in Portugal, then you'll never make them from wood, because you don't have to think about the cement. The cement just comes like free in the circularity sense. I don't mean it's free, you know, it's economically free, but it's free.
Yeah.
Whereas in fact, shouldn't the pressure be to, if we're thinking about sort of construction, in order to incorporate the things that Joanna was talking about earlier on, the value of wood, is that this is included in the index, or am I misunderstanding? You know, I mean, I'm sure I'm misunderstanding something, but it's and so it seems to me like you're setting out that there's only, whereas if you take the steel industry, and you put it out, the steel industry, because of the capacity to reduce back to the elemental nature of it, is a naturally circular system. And so things which are made from steel have the huge benefit that the raw material process incorporates, in principle, I'm not making all steel making, but in principle, it incorporates a circular process. And whereas I'm guessing that in the case of wood, this, I mean, depends what you call where growing trees come from, but this isn't the wood. You can't do anything with once it's been used. Its processes are going to be for degraded products. Because the wood will become have less properties and such things. Whereas glass and steel are ones where we can incorporate the whole process in the circular argument. And there are people obviously who are now working on designing plastics which incorporate the chemistry that allows this recycling of the process back into
the monomer,
a high quality starting material as part of the design of the process. Whereas if you only think about the product, you're disincentivizing those particular features of material production.
Yeah, absolutely. So you tackled at least 5 extremely important things that would give us an afternoon of interesting discussion. So let me see what I can say in just a couple of minutes. So several micro indicators which have their purpose, okay, not always to look at all aspects of life cycle, but some of them, for example, are essentially based on where your material comes from. And in the calculation, you have to put in how much is from bio or highly renewable sources like wood, versus how much is also recycled from the same product, okay? Or, and for example, how much is compostable or treatable at the end. So some take that into account, for example. Another different thing is renewable resources. So like you said very well, wood is very difficult to upcycle. So usually you downcycle, but you can give it fairly sustainable use at the end, okay? And you can then have it as a natural resource again. If you're going for fossil fuels, you have a completely different view, which is you cannot renew it. You have always the possibility to recycle, but you have huge costs with that recycling, which is the problem with steel. Steel, glass, aluminum are extremely pollutant in terms of recycling. And so you can sell off that your product has this recycling capability, but only if you don't actually make the balances in terms of calculation. If not, you have trade-offs in terms of sustainability. Okay. Another different thing, which is very interesting as well, is where do these come from? For example, a few years ago, it was very popular to have the biodiesels, but of course, nobody nowadays really wants to have huge plantations to produce biodiesel and not to feed people. So this is a very difficult balance to make, and this happens also, for example, with forests. So the amount that you can renew or not and the resources required to have these to increase production is not sustainable. Then you have an incredibly interesting psychological effect that is studied by social sciences, which is when you make things less pollutant, there is a tendency for people to then start using more and consuming more, which is the precise opposite effect to what we want. So you have to be very careful with saying, okay, this is now entirely recyclable. It's fantastic. The problem is solved, and people will consume more and more irresponsibly. So we have a very difficult thing in our hand. And that's why, as was said this morning, it's been years. And you said a while ago, 50 years ago, we agreed, let's not pollute the oceans.
70 years ago.
So you said that, and how much did we move? Very little. And with a lot of other aspects, because it's very difficult to think collectively and to think large enough in time frame that we can understand the differences between, for example, sources of raw material. And so obviously, raw material producers have to be concerned with each as much as the others. The thing is, a producer of raw material will probably not be able to use these tools for their part of the problem or the solution. They have to use other tools which show, how much they're helping the circular economy. These tools, microindicators, are essentially, almost all, with the exception of a couple, are essentially for when you have a product thought out, or for the entire company in terms of their portfolio of products. And they wouldn't help a raw material producer. Okay? That's my take. But there are tools for that, and they naturally have to be concerned, because if it's bad at the source, the rest is not going to solve the problem. Thank you very much.
Hello, Ricardo.
Yes.
It's Arthur. Look, I'm still in Leiria, but and I didn't hear all the conclusions. So I have a question, but I don't know if it fit in your work or not. But some 2 weeks ago, I saw in the news that Portugal is recycling 2%, is incorporating 2% of recycled material in products, and the median of European Union is 12%. This is a cultural aspect or an infrastructural aspect here in Portugal. It's a lack of infrastructures for recycling, reintegrating materials, or is cultural? What is your opinion?
In my opinion, is that it's both, which is the easy answer, right? But I have to tell you, while it's easy to blame the cultural aspect, and we do that a lot as a people, I think. For example, I know that in the Netherlands, which we usually say is a country where they're thinking ahead far from us in terms of being sustainable and, for example, collecting waste and sorting waste, I know they have a huge problem with youngsters, teenagers, young adults, actually taking responsible care of waste and sorting as they have the system implemented, which is sorting more carefully than we usually do. But people also struggle with that. So it's not a cultural thing just from us, it's a cultural thing from humanity. So we have this difficulty in understanding the large scale effects and long-term effects of small things we do. And as we know from chaos theory, etc., these small things accumulate and have this large impact. But I think in Portugal, there's clearly also an infrastructural issue. For example, a few years ago, and I think it was less than a decade ago, the government at the time said TMBs are the solution. So these big plants for treatment, mechanical biological treatment, I think it's what it's called, which is essentially you collect garbage as indifferentiated waste everywhere, and then you have huge sorting facilities, and waste is supposedly sorted so that it can be processed. This was a tremendous failure. And now people are recognizing, after several people, like for example, Fernand Leite from Lipor spent a few years saying this is not the solution, we're better than incinerating than we are with those approaches. But they were politically interesting at the time and allowed building huge facilities that gave also a lot of employment. But it is not a solution because all the waste that you then sort is contaminated. So if you think about it, if you look at it technically, this is not the way to go. And so we still have a lot of work to do in Portugal in terms of putting waste collection and especially waste treatment solutions in place so that the infrastructure is not the limitation, and then the cultural thing or the education or pedagogical aspect starts being. But we still have both, and we still have a long way to go, in my opinion. Sorry for being blunt, but I say things that as I see them.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo, for your presentation and for your answers. They were very, very interesting. Now we will continue with Ana Augusto from MAR, from Polytechnic of Leiria, with a presentation entitled Edible Coatings and Films for a Sustainable Food Preservation.
Hello, good afternoon. Let me start sharing the screen first. So can you see the presentation, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes. So good afternoon again. I'm Ana Augusto. I'm from MARE Polytechnic Leiria. And first, thank you for the invitation to be here presenting my work. And today I will talk about edible coatings and films for sustainable food preservation. And as I'm working in the Marine Research Center, all the coatings and films that I will present you today, they'll be made of marine resources. They are marine-based edible coatings or marine-based edible films. And I need to say that my presentation is a little bit different from the other presentations from today because I'm showing two examples of edible coatings and films. So just to start, as I said, we work with marine resources, and in this case, we are working with marine seaweed, with marine macroalgae that are also known by seaweeds. And in this case, we work with invasive seaweeds, which are a major problem for our ecosystems. They are causing a lot of economic and ecological problems because in their presence, the habitats are being destroyed. And in fact, there are a decrease on fauna and flora in the presence of these seaweeds. So we need to increase the interest on these seaweeds to be possible to restore the ecosystems where they are present. So while generating, and to that we need to add value to these seaweeds. So while we are generating value to these seaweeds and contributing for the blue economy, and at the same time generating interest on them, we are able to contribute for the marine ecosystem equilibrium and to the site restoration. So in our work, we are trying to add value to these seaweeds and at the same time to develop new solutions for food applications. And in our case, are the development of edible coatings and films. And what are the edible coatings and edible films? By definition, they can be any type of material that is used for food packaging in order to prolong the shelf life of the food products, and they can be used in conjunction with the food without the need of removal. And in fact, besides the protection of the food, this is also one of the biggest advantages of the use of edible coatings in films. We can heat these coatings and films with the food, and they are also considered green packaging materials since they have a lower or a residual impact for the environment. So just to distinguish, because edible coatings are different from edible films, despite they can be formulated with the same material, but they have different properties. The coatings are a thin layer of edible material formed in the surface of the food product. The coating is formed in the surface of the food product, as you can see here in these figures. These are very common, these are examples of very common of some foods where coatings are applied, and films are also a thin layer of edible material, but this edible material is prepared outside of the food product and then is applied on a food product, as the examples that we have here in the right part of the slide. And as I told you in the beginning of this presentation today, I will show you two examples of marine-based edible coatings and edible films. And I will start with the edible coatings or marine-based edible coatings that we are developing in our research group. And these edible coatings are being developed for fresh cut fruits. And what are the fresh cut fruits? Fresh cut fruits are also known by minimally processed products. They are ready to eat products, and they are also products that suffer the slight processing to remove the non-edible parts, and they are an attempt to combine freshness with convenience. Despite the convenience of the use of this or the consumption of these products, they have several disadvantages because we are processing these foods products or these fruits in the case of our study, and they present high rates of synergies. They also have a short shelf life, and they also have high rates of microbial spoilage. And because of all of these problems, all of these things, they lead to changes in texture, flavor, and color, and consequently to the rejection of these food products by the consumers. And we need to preserve these products to avoid all of these disadvantages. And how we can do it? There are several techniques that can be used. We can use low temperatures, the normal or the common refrigerated temperatures. We can also use plastic materials for the packaging of these food products, as you can see here in this in these figures. But we also can use edible coatings that are a very easy way to protect the food from the environment and to, at the same time, to increase the shelf life of the products. So to continue, we are developing our marine-based edible coatings, which is formulated with edible seaweed extract. And from previous studies, we observed that the seaweed extract of Quodio tomentoso, this green seaweed, as you can see here in this figure, presented the ability to prevent browning development in fresh cut apples that were coated with the seaweed, with a solution containing this seaweed extract. And these results were very interesting, since this seaweed extract doesn't have any specific biological activity like the antimicrobial activity and antioxidant activities. It had the ability to decrease the activity of the major of the enzymes peroxidase and polyphenol oxidase, that are the main enzymes responsible for the browning development in fresh cut fruits. And this was not observed in the samples coated with the seaweed extract or with the coatings containing the seaweed extract of Bifurcaria and Fucus spiralis, that are two seaweeds known by their bioactivities, like the antimicrobial and antioxidant activities. So after this work, and because of these excellent results, we went to a bigger test. We tried to understand we tried to assess the efficacy of this seaweed extract at industrial conditions, but because it can work very well in the laboratory scale, but we had to understand their behavior or its efficacy at a bigger scale. So we went to the facilities of our industrial partner, that is Campotec, and there we tried to understand the efficacy, or we applied the coatings, and we evaluated the efficacy of this seaweed extract at industrial conditions. And at the same time, we compared the results of, or the efficacy of this seaweed extract with a commercial solution that is nowadays used by food industry to prevent browning, or a solution that is used as an edible coating for fresh cut fruits nowadays. So after the 30 days of storage that was preferred, that the samples were, where the samples were stored at 4 degrees, we observed that the samples coated with our seaweed extract presented similar color parameters to the samples coated with the commercial coating, which was a really good result, since it was the first time that we were testing our seaweed extract at industrial conditions. In the laboratory, we were working with, imagine 1 liter of seaweed coating, and at the industrial facilities, we worked with 15 or 20 liters of coating that can change a lot the properties of the seaweed extract, or to change the efficacy of the seaweed extract. And with this work, or with this study, we observed that the seaweed extract had similar, or prevented the development of browning in fresh cut apples as the commercial solution. And in fact, when we associated the coating with the seaweed extract with a modified atmosphere packaging, it was possible to obtain a lower activity of peroxidase and polyphenol oxidase enzymes, and it was observed a lower microbial development of this on the samples coated with the seaweed extract, which can show us a possible antimicrobial activity of this seaweed extract that was not reported before. So after this, because we are lucky and we had really good results, we had to understand, the next step was to understand if this seaweed extract can work in other food factories, inclusively in other fruits, because it can work if it works in just an apples, the industry will not be interested. We need to increase the range of application of this seaweed extract. So we try to understand, because of this, we try to understand the efficacy of the seaweed extract to preserve fresh cut rocha pear. And you choose this specific variety, or pear variety, because first, it is an important pear for the Portuguese economy, and because when it is processed as a fresh cut fruit, when we slice the pears, they start browning very fast. They presented high rates of browning when processed as a fresh cut product, being necessary to develop new solutions to stop this browning. And in our study that had a duration of 15 days at 4 degrees, we observed that during the storage period, and inclusively after the 15 days of storage, our samples coated with the seaweed extract presented a lower browning development when compared with the control that were just the samples immersed in water, and also when compared with the samples coated with the commercial solution. And inclusively, we observed also during the storage period a low yeast and mold growth, again reinforcing the possible antimicrobial activity of this seaweed extract. And this activity, this less browning development in fresh cut pears was maybe related with a possible physical barrier that is being formed in the surface of the food products, which will then protect the food products against the environment, and also to reduce all the mechanisms that leads to the browning in this kind of products. However, we need to conduct more studies to access all the mechanisms that are under this efficacy. And this was the first example of an edible coating that I wanted to show you, because using this, we can avoid the use of extra plastic materials, and we can increase at the same time the shelf life of these products, avoiding the food loss that is characterized in this when we try to produce this kind of products. Now I will show you an example of an edible film that we are developing in our research group. And this work started with Amalia project. It was an European project, and now we are optimizing some of the aspects of the films with the C-Film project. And now I will show you just a few results of the project. So to start, I forgot to tell you, this film was developed to be applied to preserve frozen seafood, because seafood as the fresh cut fruits, or even more than the fresh cut fruits, seafood has high rates of senescence. It's very easy to lose our seafood products. So we need to preserve these food products, and the freezing of fish is an efficient method of seafood conservation. It allows to prolong the shelf life of the products, and it is also associated with low cost and maintenance. However, when we try to freeze the fish, and we can do it at our homes, and we see this every day, there is the protein there are some disadvantages, like the protein denaturation, the lipid oxidation of the tissues, which occurs mainly in foods with high fat content, and also we can observe the freeze burn of the tissues that is characterized by the whiteness color in the surface of the tissues. That means that indicates that also there is the desiccation of the meat, or the fish in this case. And all these mechanisms lead to the changes on color, texture, and flavor changes, and consequently to the rejection of these products by the consumers. And there is the need to stop all of this degradative process, and we need into that there is the need to use appropriate packaging. And in fact, there are a lot of types of packagings that are being used by the food industry to prevent this to happen. And an appropriate packaging has the objective to protect food products from the environmental conditions, that the ones that are used in low temperatures, and they can act as a barrier to light, oxygen, humidity, and also to microbial contamination. Despite the widely use of packagings by the food industry, there is a problem. Almost all the formulations, or all the films or packagings, are made of plastic. And we know from the last Single-Use Plastics Directive that we need to avoid the use of plastic packagings, especially the ones that are for a single use, or to use one single time. So we need to replace these packagings, or we need to avoid the use of them. And at the same time, we need to increase the functionality of this packaging, since they can prevent the freeze burn, but they are not 100% effective when you need to develop solutions with higher efficacy to prevent the development of this freeze burn. So the solution for this problem is the development of a new biodegradable active food packaging film for frozen fish. And at the same time, this is our solution. It is also our objective, but it's also our challenge. It is a big challenge to try to develop this kind of products or this kind of technologies. So how we try to do it? We started with incorporation of 2 seaweed extracts into seaweed polymers. And here we used 2 specific invasive seaweeds, brown seaweed, Sargassum muticum, and a red seaweed, Gratulupia turuturu. And after this, we did the film's application in frozen salmon, followed a 6-month storage at -18 degrees. And now we did the films. The films were prepared by casting. That is a very common way to prepare films. And we just need to mix the seaweed extracts with the polymer and the plasticizer and the solvent through the casting. And after the solvent evaporation, it is possible to obtain a film as the one that you can see here in this figure. So after this, we did some tests, because we had to understand the effect of these seaweed extracts incorporation into the polymeric matrix. And after that, we observed no change. We did not observe changes on the mechanical properties. However, we observed lower decrease on the water solubility, which is a really good result or a good property, because when we decrease the water solubility of these films, we can increase the resistance of these films to environments with high rates of humidity. And at the same time, we observe the increase of films water vapor permeability and also the increase of the biodegradability of these films, which is also very important for the sustainability of these films, or the use, the possible use of these films in the future. And to that, we can observe these figures where the samples, where the seaweed extracts were incorporated in Sargasso and Petulupia films. After 14 days of composting, we observed that these films were more degraded than even the seaweed polymer films, and of course, then the plastic material that is nowadays used by food industry to individualize each of the seafood products. Now, for me, the most important part of this project, or the most important results of the project, there was the effect of these films in salmon quality after 6 months of storage at -18 degrees. We observed that the samples that were packaged with the seaweed polymer and also with the plastic material presented the development of a freeze burn in the surface of the samples. As you can see here in these figures, inclusively they are characterized by higher whiteness color that is here represented by the L, the color parameter L. And the samples that were packaged with the films with the Sargasso and Petulupia extracts incorporation, they were characterized by the reddish color that is here represented by the color parameter A, that represents the reddish color. And these samples were also more similar to the samples, the fresh samples that were before the storage, the 6 months storage. And now, just to have a better overview of these results, here we have a principal component analysis that can be divided in 2 main clusters. Here, the green cluster, where the plastic films or the samples packaged with the plastic films and with the seaweed polymer are included in this cluster, which is characterized mainly with by the development of white color. And in the other part, we have the blue cluster that include the samples packaged with the Petulupia and Sargasso films, which are characterized by the fresh color. I cannot say the freshness color, but the samples that were more similar to the samples before the 6 months of storage, as I told you before. This was the main results of our work, and now we are just optimizing the film composition to try to increase the mechanical resistance of the films when in the presence of environments with high humidity. Now, just to conclude and to remember the importance of the use of edible coatings and edible films for food products, with the single-use plastics directive, there is a new rule that the producers will be responsible for the deposit and for the use of the plastic materials that are used to store or to transport the food materials, which means that they will pay more, they will have extra taxes because they are using single-use plastics. And if you can use these edible coatings and films in the food industry, they will avoid these extra taxes, and at the same time, they will contribute for a more green environment. And now, just the take-home message, we know that we are an increasing population and that the current environmental and health issues concerning current technologies have urged for a global quest for new food preservatives for new food preservatives. And maybe the marine resources could be our solution, because they can provide us with strong solutions, as the 2 examples that I showed you today. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Anna, for your motivating presentation.
Thank you.
We have time for some questions from the audience.
Please do it.
Anna, great presentation.
Okay.
What's the next challenge after fish?
Then, sorry, can you repeat? I'm not,
I said, great presentation.
so,
What's
yes,
the next challenge after fish?
after fish,
Yes.
after fish. I think that we can preserve not the fish, but we have more, let me think, we have the fruits, we have the fish, fruit, fish, the meat, maybe. And we can also try the other types of fish, because fish, it's a big problem to preserve. And depending on the type of fish, there are different challenges. The salmon is the lipid oxidation, but we have also the tuna, that is the color changes. The solution will be different. You need to test more. Before the meat, maybe we have to test in more fish, in more seafood products, maybe.
Thank you.
In terms of, in terms of nutritional value, did you notice any change after 6 months?
No, because when we are working with frozen products, we need to see differences. We need to increase the storage period. Now we have samples for 9 months, and we will analyze it in the next weeks to understand. Maybe we'll see now changes on the nutritional value of the products. With 6 months, it's not, in some products you can see differences, but with our samples, we did not see any differences.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't think there are more questions. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you again, Anna, for
Thank you.
presentation. Okay. Now let's close this session. First, I would like to thank again to all the lecturers and their attention-grabbing presentations. They were really interesting, and I think we will take home some messages. One of them is that we are all part of the solution, and that we can all increase the sustainability by making wise choices in our daily lives, and others that we are surrounded by natural resources as the forests and the oceans that can be used as game changers to improve sustainability. So thank you. Let's thank to all of them again. Thank you so much.